Hi, I'm Fred Skaggs, retired pastor and marriage and family therapist. Welcome. My subject today is, but if not. The text is Daniel chapter 3, highlighting verses 1 through 18. As with the first two chapters, Daniel 3 is set during the reign of King Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon. The tension is introduced when Nebuchadnezzar made a huge golden statue, estimated at 103 feet tall, like the average 9-story building today. He assembled all the government officials of all the provinces for the dedication of this great image, and then insisted that everyone present bow down and worship it. It, in this case, ultimately referred to Nebuchadnezzar himself. Most people at that time would have had little difficulty with this request, as most of them were polytheists, commonly acknowledging many deities. They could easily have assimilated that statue into their religious scheme, especially under the duress of capital punishment. The call included Daniel's three friends, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who were rulers of the headquarters province of Babylon. Daniel was not included, since his only position was chief of the wise men, a non-political office. Their belief in one God, however, prohibited participation in this ritual, and their adversaries knew it well. In verses 4 through 5, we read, "Then a herald shouted out the king's command. At his signal, the orchestra played. The choir began to sing, and everyone was to fall prostrate on the ground and worship the image." Verse 7 says, "Everyone, even the illegal immigrants present, bowed down to old Neb's statue." At least it looked like that, except for 3 Jewish men. The text indicates that the 3 friends of Daniel could have gotten away with their disobedience if it were not for certain enemies who turned them in, verses 9 through 12. These informers were identified as astrologers in verse 8. They were probably professional colleagues who hated to see these gifted foreigners rise so quickly and so high in the Babylonian government. How these Hebrews got this high, we don't know. These astrologers thought they had the perfect plan to put away these 3 men, so they rat on them. Now picture the conversation. It almost certainly went something like this. They go to the king and they say, "O king, we're not trying to cause trouble or anything like that, but we think a lot of you and feel like you ought to know that those 3 Jews you put in leadership position in your government have flat out failed to follow your order, and it appears that they have no intentions of obeying you. We just felt like you ought to know that." Isn't that nice of them? Just to be helpful, not political. Yeah, right. Nebuchadnezzar is furious. "Bring them here." But controlling his anger momentarily, he stopped questioning them and graciously gave them an opportunity to save themselves and correct their insolence. He says, "We're going to do this one more time. Maybe you didn't hear my order, or you didn't think it applied to everybody. This is your chance to set this straight." He would order the musicians to play again, he says, so the 3 men might prove their loyalty and obedience by worshiping the image then and there. But Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego loved God more than they did Nebuchadnezzar. Not only had they learned to recite the Shema, the Jewish confession of faith, "Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. Love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your strength," Deuteronomy 6, 4 through 5. But they also made it the center of their lives. For them, the will and glory of God meant more to them than fame, position, or security. Their commitment to Him was genuine. It was real to the point They were ready to lay down their lives if necessary. That's impressive. Obviously, the consequences of failing to do that were serious. At such a great cost, we would normally find people looking for some way to get out of those consequences. I'm impressed with what they did not do to find some excuse for a way to get around his command. These were intelligent men. Surely they conferred with each other about what actions they ought to take about this proclamation before they actually responded, because they knew the consequences. Let's look at some of the things they could have tried, but did not. They might have said things like, "It's useless to resist. We have no resources other than the goodwill we built up now. Now, obviously, that's not working. So why fight it? We're in a strange land, and you know what they say? When you're in Babylon, do as the Babylonians do." They might say, "Of course, if we were at home in Judea, we wouldn't think of such a thing. We would remember how God said, 'You shall have no other gods before me. You shall not make any graven image or any likeness of anything that's in heaven or above. You shall not bow down to them nor serve them.'" Exodus 23:24. They might have said, "If we were at home, we would obey that law. But here, we're hundreds of miles away from Jerusalem. Nobody will ever know. And if they did, they'd understand." Nobody will ever know. Those are dangerous words. We can often deceive ourselves with an excuse like that to do things that down inside us we have serious questions about. But nobody will ever know. Fred Friendly, longtime president of CBS, is said to have had a large art piece behind his desk that showed a small island out in the vast ocean with a pretty girl and a man under a palm tree. Underneath the picture were the words, "I will know." Think about that. Apparently, some suggestion was made that included those words, "Nobody will ever know but us." The response was simple: "I will know." And that's what really matters. These three men were willing to say, "We will know," and that's all that really matters. Then they might have said, "Let's just fake it. When we bow down, we could just as well be cursing the statue as honoring it. The king will never know, and none of his officers will either." These Hebrews did not need to believe the idol to be divine or confess the least faith in it. They might have excused their behavior by saying that they prostrated themselves to the music and not to the idol. But they knew that others would be watching and would undoubtedly see what they were doing and their witness, and they were not willing to pay that price with regard to their faith. Then they might have said, "Everybody else is doing it." That morning, when the rising sun was greeted by the strains of those varied instruments of music from Persia and Greece and Babylon, when all the people were gathered together, everybody bowed. There were other Jews there, and apparently they all bowed. The king's authorities might have said to these men, "Your own countrymen have bowed before the image. What's so special about you?" Everybody's doing it. Everybody's doing it is another of the common escape mechanisms we use to justify improper behavior, as if immoral, sinful behavior can be defensible if the majority of the group approves of it. Young people and adults all often use this open door to approve behavior that they know is wrong. Everybody else is doing it is never an excuse for doing something that is patently wrong. Then they might have said, "It's only once and not for very long." They might have been thinking, 10 minutes or so, once in a lifetime, to please the king. Such a trivial thing can't make any real difference. At any rate, it's not enough to face a fiery furnace for. You know how Nebuchadnezzar is. One day he thinks our God is the real God, and the next he's on another trick. In the time of temptation, Many of us fail because the sin is seemingly small. We need to remember that there is no little sin. He who steals $50 is no less a thief than the one who steals 50,000. Sin is sin, a direct insult to our God. These young men were not smart alecks. They're not trying to be heroes. They knew Nebuchadnezzar too well for that. They considered the command, the consequences, but also their commitment. That took courage and a faith that wasn't fake. Their words were in verse 17 through 18, "If we are thrown into the blazing furnace, the God we serve will be able to save us from it, and he will rescue us from your hand, O king. But if he doesn't, we want you to know, O king, that we will not serve you or worship the golden statue that you have put up." That's a chilling confession of faith. Let's move away from Babylon now and ask, how do we translate that into our world? Is this just a nice story for gullible people? Or does it have something to say to us? Are there still people around whose commitment to the living God is great enough that they would face their own fiery furnace to stand for their convictions if they had to? More specifically, are we solid enough in our faith that rather than surrender it, we would pay any price to stand for what we believe is God's will for us? Amen.